Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today. We're looking forward to sharing information with you about the GFP module. While we're waiting to get started here in just a minute or two, I'd like to request that everyone take a second to look at the poll on your screen. We'd love to get an idea of what your comfort level is currently with the GFP module. So please just take a moment to respond to that question. And I do have just a couple of announcements to go through, and then we'll get started. So first of all, I want to make sure that everyone is aware that we are recording this presentation today. So if you miss a note or a question and you want to come back to that later, that will be an option for you, but also keep that in mind. If you decide that you'd like to ask a question out loud, it will be on the recording. So please make a note of that. We are going to hold questions for the end. We have a very large group here today, and we're going to try to get through as much as we can and answer as many questions as possible in our time frame. So if you do have questions, we'll save them for the end, and you have a couple of options for asking those questions. The first option is to type your question in. So there's a questions panel that you'll see in your GoToWebinar platform on your screen. If you type in a question, then I will ask the question for you, but I will not announce your name. So if you'd like to be anonymous in your question, that's a good way to go. It also may be the easiest way just to keep the questions rolling at the end of the presentation. If you would prefer to ask your question out loud, then you have an option of raising your hand. So there's a hand icon on your GoToWebinar panel. If you click on the hand, you will raise your hand and I'll know that you would like to be unmuted so that you can ask your question. Keep in mind, if you are using your phone to call in for audio, you must have entered your audio pin to ask a question in that way. If you are using your computer mic and speakers, then you're good. If we have anyone on the phone that was unable to get into the webinar, just respond to the reminder message that you had earlier today with your questions over email, and I'll try to get to them that way. But again, we have a lot of people on today, and we're going to get through as much as we possibly can in this time frame. So I am going to go ahead and close out the poll so we can get started. Looks like the majority of you have entered your response. And we're going to go ahead and share the results of the poll. Okay, awesome. We've got a very good distributed group here, and it looks like a good audience that has a lot to learn. So 8% of you are very comfortable with the GFP module, 30% somewhat, 13% not comfortable, and 49% of you have not used it before. So this is going to be really great and very helpful for our presenters today. I'm going to go ahead and hide the results of the poll, and you should all see the presentation on your screen at this time. So let me go to my staff here. So our presenters today are Carol and Pam, and they are going to be sharing some really great information with you, and I don't want to take any more time away from them. So I am going to turn the presentation over to Carol.
Thank you so much, Jessica. We are excited about the opportunity to talk to you about the new GFP module. I unfortunately am not able to get connected, so I'm doing this kind of blind, so I wasn't able to see the actual distribution results. I guess another thing that would be interesting to know is how many of you are government versus industry members, because right now the only rule really is for government people for the module, but it is going to be building fast for everyone in our community to be utilizing this. The next slide, please. So at least half of you, right, have probably heard about the GFP module. It is a new application in WAF, the Wide Area Workflow, and it consolidates our GFP capabilities into a single tool. We launched phase 1 on April 2nd, so it's now been out for, I guess about 6 weeks. And, it's kind of really fast moving for the other phases down the road. But phase 1, the GFP attachment piece, the only active rules within the module are for government at this time. So I just want to make that clear. If you're industry and you're like, well, I haven't done anything with it, well, we wouldn't expect you to do anything with it just yet. But the GFP attachment used to be done kind of offline, and then it had to be uploaded into EDA, but you needed to use our format so that we could extract the data into the IUID registry, what we have now done is kind of streamlined the whole process. It's no longer going to the IUID registry. It's all going to be maintained within the GFP module. Phase 2, the GFP movement, that's coming really fast. That's going to be mid-July. That's pulling in the shipments and receipts that are currently performed in IRAP. Those are now going to be done within the GFP module. The best part about that from our standpoint is it's going to allow us to reuse the data that is in the module from the GFP attachment so that we can pre-populate transactions to increase our data integrity, to reduce the data burden, and to give us more transparency. It's going to allow us to compare shipments and receipt data to the attachment data, and we'll be able to flag any kind of discrepancies. And we'll be able to do so much better reporting when it comes to our GFP when we have this capability live in July. We'll be able to do something kind of akin to reconciliation, you know, by being able to match what was on the attachment, what have we you know, said we'll send you, what have we sent you, what have you received, you know, those types of things. And we just really haven't been able to have a good view in that in the past. And people have tried to use the GFP attachment as a living document, and that's never been its intention. And so we'll be able to finally satisfy that need when we get this capability up and running in July. Phase 3, that pulls in the dispositioning piece, the plant clearance and property loss functionality that's currently performed within the DCMA e-tools. We're looking at March 2019 for that capability within the module. Again, we're going to be able to reuse the data for that. It's going to allow us to do workflow and reporting on that data. And then phases 4 and 5 is still in the pre-planning phase, but that's the phase that we have a lot of enthusiasm for within the larger property community, because we are going to have it integrate and update the APSR information and with the DoD supply systems. And so we'll finally have this kind of end-to-end ecosystem for GFP, kind of all residing within this GFP module. The starting point, of course, being phase 1. Next slide. So this is just a screenshot of what the GFP module looks like in wide array workflow. The process to gain access to it is like the other modules within wide array workflow. There is a approval that has to happen by the supervisor, and then from there it goes to a group administrator, a GAM, for activation. We've had a little bit of some headaches associated with the activation process, because at the same time they deployed the release that gave us the GFP module, they made a change to the way that the GAM structure was set up, whereas previously the GAMs were organized by application, right? You had a GAM that did IRAP, you had a GAM that did EDA, My Invoice, you know, MRS, IUID, etc. And there was a decision made as we are moving to kind of this single sign-on process that the GAMs should be managed by DoDAC, not by application. But the messaging on that and the training and education on that didn't really trickle down. And so there was a lot of confusion, and there were some issues with organization of how that kind of deployed when at the same time that our module went live. And so we know that there's still some issues kind of hanging out there around that. So if you haven't had the opportunity to use the GFP module, it might be because you are still awaiting activation. And if that is in fact the case, I would appreciate if you would send me an email so that I can try to help you work through that. My email is on the front of the presentation, and you can also reach me, Pam, and Ed, who also is supporting us in our office, through the Contact Us function on the DoD Procurement Toolbox. The next slide, I'm going to let Pam talk to.
Thanks, Carol. So Carol talked to each of the phases. Slide 4 simply shows you in a visual format what those phases look like in the broader ecosystem. So you can see in the larger gray box, that's WAF, that's the big suite of applications that support the procurement environment within DoD. I'm sure you're all familiar with IRAP, you're probably familiar with EDA, probably My Invoice. So it's a ecosystem that enables collaboration between industry and government. The boxes in green are the phase 1 capabilities, so those are in production today. And then you can see visually that within the GFP module, the foundation of phase 1, the GFP attachment, will feed into and pre-populate the subsequent phases. With phase 2 being the property transfer, that is currently in the first phase of testing. So that is essentially migrating what's the current IRAP property transfer functionality from IRAP into the module, with the enhancement of accessing the GFP attachment as the foundation of that authorization for shipments from the government to industry, as well as if industry is doing a unilateral receipt, the GFP attachment will inform that unilateral receipt. It won't preclude anything, so it won't ever stop you from reporting a receipt of GFP, but it will make an association with the attachment so that when you say, hey, I've just received 10 of NSN 123, that will bounce against the attachment. If NSN 123 is on the attachment, then the system will know that you now have 3 of those things, and it will essentially keep a running tally of the GFP in your position at any point in time. So that's really what Carol was saying, the benefits of doing the attachment first to the rest of the story. That's one example of that. And then phase 3 disposition, phase 4 the update, meaning changes to GFP while it's in contractor custody, and then the integration. So while industry doesn't really have so much of a role in the attachment because that's an inherently governmental, contractual piece of the process, starting in phase 2 and from there forward, it's very much a bilateral process between industry and government. And so we would definitely anticipate industry's participation in testing and then doing more of these types of training sessions with industry from phase 2 going forward. So Carol, I'll turn it back over to you if you want to talk about the chart 5, the attachment itself.
Thank you, Pam. So this is just a little bit more information about the GFP attachment process in the new GFP module. We now have it as a single management point. We've migrated in existing GFP attachments that were in the version that we deployed about 2 years ago. If that managed to make it into the registry, we were able to migrate that data in. We reuse a lot of the data fields on the GFP attachment Excel template that we have been using for the last 2 years. So if you are familiar at all with that, then it's not a big change from there, although our form is slightly different, and you would know that because it says 2.0 and also remove the serial number and UII, which I will probably talk about in just a second. Anyway, the other big thing that we have done with this GFP module process is established a workflow, which really gives us kind of the buy-in from the larger property PM community to really kind of invest them in our process. We were optimistic that these types of activities were happening for the attachment offline, but we had reason to believe that they probably weren't, or certainly weren't happening with the frequency and the kind of attention that we would have wanted to occur. So what we have now done is created separate roles for initiator, reviewer, and approver, allowing the program management community, logistics community, maybe material control activity, cores, property book officers, perhaps your administrating contracting officer, all of these people to be part of the process, before it comes to contracting for inclusion in the contract or modification or solicitation. And so this is a big thing for us. This is a new thing for us to really get this community on board with this, but we are really excited about what this is going to do. And so we have been doing a lot of training on this. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more detail, the workflow in another slide, but this is kind of just one of the really exciting things we're able to do with this new process. There's real-time data quality validation. We did have that before, but it works even, I think, a little bit slicker now with the module. And then there's now auto distribution to EDA, and it no longer goes to the IUID registry. And there's limited reporting options right now, but we are able to track if there is a problem where there's an attachment that seems to be approved and waiting for attachment to a modification or award, and there's no match found, so that we can kind of suss out what may be holding it up from distributing to EDA. If you move on to slide 6, this just kind of summarizes what we've already really touched upon, but why we really think that this is a good thing. A requirement to have a GFP attachment, a requirement to do a GFP attachment in our format, to be following our rules and regs. That's been out for a long time. So we do really kind of want to highlight, the benefits we have here, because sometimes it hasn't been so clear in the past why it was worthwhile spending the time and effort to, follow our process. But now, it's a lot easier if you use a GFP module. There's no longer this kind of bulky conversion process. We don't have to work through some of the flaws that we found with Adobe. And there is now automatic upload to EDA, which was a real problem for users of ComWrite. They had to do a separate step to upload their GFP attachment, and we had reason to believe that probably wasn't happening in all cases. That allows us to do this kind of coordination with the stakeholders on GFP. We did find out from our logistics community that they never knew what was happening. They would find out after the fact. This allows them to be invested in the process beforehand, before that GFP is negotiated with the contractor and promised, and then so that we can head off any potential issues by them being invested in that process along the way. The GFP attachment is now going to be our source data for other transactional processes, other phases within the module. And then we are trying to reuse as much as possible the existing XML and Excel, so that it is not something that is terribly different. This is a very similar look and feel to what we have been using in training and talking about for the last couple of years. Slide 7, I will maybe pass this over to Pam so that there's a little bit more entertainment here with 2 people presenting to you, not just one speaking at you.
Because this is such an entertaining subject. So this chart gives a visual indication of what Carol just described with the workflow process. So your government customers are likely one or more of these roles. And so the first role is the initiator on the left. That's going to be the requiring activity or the program management office. They are the ones who likely are knowledgeable about what it's going to take to perform the contract from the perspective of what GFP will be required for either a new contract, a follow-on contract, or a modification. So they're the guys who put the data in from the beginning. And so, as you can see, they have a couple of different options of how they do that based on how much data there is, where the data is, and what their capabilities are. Once they create the GFP attachment, then it becomes initiated and it flows to the reviewer. If there's a reviewer, the reviewers are either 0 to N. So there can be no reviewers and it could go straight to the approver, or there can be 1 or more reviewers that are identified by the initiator as he creates the GFP attachment routing criteria. we anticipate that the reviewers will be those organizations that have a stake in the property itself. So the logistics organization, the MCA, who is the approver for GFP to move to a contractor, the property officer perhaps. We've learned from our training with DoD that the core, the contractor officer representative, is likely also a reviewer. So the reviewers will receive the GFP attachment for their review in a sequential order that's identified by the initiator when he defines the workflow. Once all of the reviewers have had their review of the attachment, during which they can make changes or they can return it to the initiator. Once they have all had their chance to look at the GFP attachment, when the last reviewer has finished his review, then the GFP attachment moves further in the workflow to the approver. The approver is generally going to be an 1102 type of person, so it's going to be the contracting officer, the ACO, the contractor specialist, somebody who has authority to attach a contractual document to the contract itself. And so he will have a look at the attachment. He may not know all of the nuances of every particular GFP item that's being identified, but he has the ability to look back through the workflow, everywhere that attachment has been, who has reviewed it, any comments that they may have attached to the process that wouldn't necessarily be attached to the attachment that goes to the contract. And then he makes his decision whether to approve the attachment or to return it. So if he approves it, then it will pull some data down from EDA. One of the data elements that it pulls from EDA is the cage code that's associated with the prime contract. And the reason for that, which is relevant to the industry guys, is because once that cage code is pulled, then only the contractor who has that same cage code has visibility into that attachment within the module. So that is the authorization for the vendor view only role and what they would see. So as a vendor, when you request the GFP module and you go in and you want to look at your GFP attachments that are associated with one of your contracts, you will only be able to see those attachments that have actually found their match in EDA and have a cage code that matches your user ID cage code. So with that, I think we're done with that chart. And we can move on to chart 8, which now we'll start to talk about phase 2. So I'll turn it back over to Carol if you want to talk to this one.
Sure, and then I'll let you talk about phase 3. Phase 2, which we have just started testing with, will replace all the property functionality that currently is performed in IRAP. So if you have been following the requirements to, if you're on the government side, to create a shipment notification, to send the property from IRAP, or on the contractor side, if you've been following the requirement under 252.211-7000 that compels you to receipt all GFP, you would only be able to receipt non-UII GFP via IRAP. So that whole process that works through IRAP is now being moved into the GFP module, and we were able to migrate, or I guess we are expecting to be able to migrate the shipment and receipt data for the past 2 years into the module, so that will actually allow us to pre-populate both from that information and from the GFP attachment data. So we'll have data already available for us to use within the module. We're not going to have to start from zero. We talked about this already, but some of the things that we're going to gain from this that we haven't really had any kind of view into before was discrepancies between shipped items, if they're not on the attachment, or if we're exceeding amounts, or, yeah, so any of those types of things, we'll be able to track that and recognize it, and then make changes as necessary to the GFP attachment so that our GFP attachment reflects, what is accurate and what is something that the contractor is authorized to have. Because although you don't treat the GFP attachment like a living document, the contractor should not have GFP in their possession that is not on the GFP attachment. So we're not going to do any kind of work stoppage issue here. We are going to allow those items to be, identified within the system and processed within the system, but it's going to allow us more easily to make those updates to the GFP attachment, so we have this kind of integrity in our process. We'll be able to pre-populate shipments from contractors, right, with their prior receipt data or the GFP attachment data, right, because we know that we haven't been 100% complying with the current process, and so that's fine, right? It's a new day, new things are coming. Now is a really good time to get on board with our processes, our requirements with the GFP module. So if we don't have data there that was already, from the shipment side, that's fine. You know what? If there's any changes to the GFP attachment, we'll be able to pull it in. Maybe this is the impetus you need to say, you know what, you're right. I don't really have a good GFP attachment. I'm using an Excel. I'm not using anything that resembles what the PGI talks about. So, I want to be able to benefit from these pre-population and this visibility and the reporting that I'm going to get out of the GFP module. So let me, do a mod to my contract and get the GFP attachment data into the GFP module so that we can use that here. So this is, a little bit field of dreams, I acknowledge, but we are optimistic and enthusiastic that this is going to really get us, better in terms of compliance with the GFP attachment, compliance with the electronic transactions, about the GFP that have been required for a number of years, but just really haven't maybe been as diligently followed as we would like. I mentioned before that the serial number and UII were removed off the GFP attachment. That is because the feedback we were getting was that was not actually adding value. It was adding burden and confusion and rework when people either, struggled to identify which items they were going to do, if they guessed, if they created fake information, when they actually had those items in their possession. If that didn't match what the serial number on the GFP attachment, they really would be compelled to update the GFP attachment so that we didn't have a mismatch, and that they were shown as having the authority to have those items in their possession, that there wasn't a discrepancy there. But that means, for us to have this item traceability that we need for this end-to-end process that we're building here with this GFP module, we are going to require entry of the serial number and UII for serially managed items. And so we haven't been doing that in the past, but that is, where we are now going to kind of create a hard requirement that when you're receiving an item that is serially managed, no kidding, you have to have a serial number or a UII for that item. And so this is important for, a number of reasons now, or rather, I guess you need to pay attention to this for a number of reasons, because I'm not sure that people in the past have made, much effort about ensuring that the appropriate items, were listed on the serially managed tab or on the non-serially managed tab on the GFP attachment. More than once we would see GFP attachments that had the exact same items listed on both tabs. And that's really not appropriate because of the reporting requirements around serially managed items are much more specific and frequent and involved than they are for non-serially managed items. So, this is now the time to make sure that your GFP attachment is accurate when it comes to, are your items serially managed or not serially managed? The guidance that we cite for, serially managed is should something be serially managed, is 8320.04. I'll let Pam correct me if I'm wrong about that, but that's the IUID marking guide. And so if something is serially managed, it should be marked, although we recognize that not everything that is serially managed has been marked. So So we do permit, tracking by serial number if it has not yet been marked for some reason, but is truly something that is serially managed. GFP Phase 2 is also going to give us the visibility into the GFP in the contractor's custody that we, it's been hard to run reporting on that in the past. So we're really excited about the viewpoint we're going to get there. The next slide goes into the benefits. Some of these are the same as the benefits we saw with Phase 1, that we're going to be able to reuse data with pre-population. So this is going to decrease, the burden of separate data entry, any potential data quality issues. In the past, outside of this GFP module, you could theoretically identify the same item, 4 or 5 different ways. We would have no idea that we were actually working with the same item, from what's described on the GFP attachment versus what the contractor receipted, what maybe went through some kind of property loss or plant clearance, if it was moved on to another contract or sent to another contractor. And there was no controls in place to ensure that we were using the same identifiers about those assets, in the past. And so we are going to really bring that kind of level of rigor into this process. So, so that's really going to give us the reporting that we have been lacking for so many years, in terms of giving us, like, where is our property, how much property do we still owe based upon what was promised on the GFP attachment, and really give us, better visibility into our GFP. Which, as we move into this fire audit, we are really concerned about having a better idea of where we stand with this, so that we are going to be more responsive when it comes to, reporting and records. Next slide, I'm going to pass this back over to Pam. This is for Phase 3.
Thanks, Carol. So Phase 3 is essentially going to take what you know today as PCARs and PLT, the property loss tool, that are the DCMAE tools, or however the services are dispositioning excess property that you have. So we're going to take both of those kind of disparate processes that exist today, and we're going to pull them into the module. So, as Carol talked about, the module's mission is to track and manage the entire end-to-end life cycle of GFP. So clearly, with the attachment being the authorization, Phase 1, Phase 2 being the movements, Phase 3 being when an item leaves inventory for whatever reason, while it's in contractor custody. So that's what Phase 3 is. It's both what you do today through DCMA, and I want to be super clear what the services do today, because those are not always aligned, and that's kind of a pain for industry because they've got 2 different processes. So we're trying to harmonize those 2 into one place and exploit the data that we already have. So in the GFP module, it should know in the future all of the GFP that is in your custody. And so it should make it much easier for industry to create the inventory schedule of excess or of things that have been lost or destroyed based on what you already have. So it's essentially, if you have 10 tanks and you no longer need 10 tanks, you only need 8 tanks. 2 of them are excess and you want to give them back to DoD, then you would simply select from your GFP inventory that the system knows about those things that you want to declare as excess. So we're trying super hard to make the process of creating your inventory schedule easier. So we will know also, the system will know exactly which items are by serial number and UII you have, if they are serially managed. If they are not serially managed, then simply it would be by inventory type, however that item was described to you on your GFP attachment, which should have propagated through your receipt, which then would propagate through to your disposition. Today, PCARS at least has sort of a CSV file that you can create from the Excel that they have. We're looking to not get rid of that initially, but we're also looking to create an official DELMS transaction that is a data structure that can be created from your system instead of having to kind of separately create the CSV file. We are looking to automate data exchange for what today is a very paper and letter-based communication. Some of that is required in FAR, and so clearly we have to go back and consider whether or not we want to change the policy to kind of bring the policy up to where technology can increase the velocity of the communication. The case file today is sort of this fluid amalgamation of kind of everything that's happened with a disposition case or with a PLT case. What we're trying to do is to capture all of that information into a single package and then associate it in a formal way with the contract file in EDA, so that for each case, whether that case is one inventory schedule or an aggregation of inventory schedules, but for each case that's established for a plant clearance or a property loss, that everybody has visibility into the dispositioning and the rationale for the dispositioning in a consolidated manner. Probably the most important thing is that today, when either PCARS or PLT tells the contractor to disposition an item, whether it's sell it, scrap it, whatever the direction is to the contractor, there is no backflow into the accountable property system of record to tell that system that the item is out of DoD inventory. That's a problem. So that, as much as anything else, really drove plant clearance and property loss to be phase 3, because the accountable property systems of record need to know when something that they are tracking and accounting for has left the inventory and is no longer part of the DoD inventory and is no longer part of the financial records. Moving on to the next chart, oh, I'm sorry. So Carol, this is phase 4. Do you want to talk to phase 4?
No, you go right ahead.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so phase 4 today, contractors have a dual reporting requirement, which really isn't fair and is horribly inefficient. So today, you have the requirement to report receipt of GFP when it's coming to you for a repair contract, and you have the DFARS requirement then to identify when that item is shipped back to DoD. You probably also have a requirement on a service level to report that exact same information into the Contractor Asset Visibility System, CAV. So for a long time, we've been trying to harmonize these two duplicative requirements, and the GFP module really gives us the forcing function to be able to make that happen. So phase 4 we call updates. Those are updates to an item while it is in a contractor's custody. So the shorthand for that is the things that you report now to CAV. So you've received it, it's been inducted, it's awaiting parts, it's awaiting a technician, it's ready for issue. Those events that you report to CAV today, in phase 4, it's on the roadmap, but it's not scheduled, but we would anticipate that those would be the types of things that you would report to the GFP module. So you would report the repair-specific events. Since you already have the requirement in the module to say, hey, I've got this thing, then it's a logical extension to say, and now I've inducted it, and now this other thing has happened. So it's a very logical extension to the module, just for industry to be able to communicate to DoD what is happening to that item while it's in the repair cycle. We want to add the ability to associate the embedded items when they're going back as part of a repair. So this gets a little complex. Today, we can do that with GFP that's UII'd as you are doing your reparable receiving report in IRAPT. That we do not anticipate will change. But what probably will change is the ability to identify GFP that is serially managed, that's going back embedded in a repair item, that today you really don't have a way to report that it's being returned to DoD. So we hope to close that gap during phase 4. And then today in the IUID registry, you have the capability to convert a non-UII GFP item to a UII if you happen to have the requirement to mark it while it is in your custody. Clearly, that's something that happens normally or most often during the repair cycle, so we would anticipate including that in phase 4. Until phase 4, if you are in the situation where you have receipted a non-UII GFP item and then you mark it and you want to register that item with its UII before you ship it back, then you would still go through the manual process on the IUID registry. But we're hoping to automate that during phase 4 to make it a much more seamless and streamlined process. So phase 5, Carol, go on, or do you want to take this one?
Sure, I'll step in for phase 5. So that is integration, and this is the one that the logistics community and the PMs are super excited about, because it's going to give us the ability to send and receive data with the APSRs. It will be kind of this nirvana that we have been trying to get to all these years. That was the intent behind moving to recording GFP data in the IUID registry, because we thought that that was going to be the mechanism that the APSRs would pull from, and that just has never been as fully realized as we had hoped. And so this is really one of the other reasons why we've moved to this new process of the GFP module and WAF, so that we can control all this the data and the transaction information, so that it's a single source, a single entry point, single exit point, and will then kind of sync up with the APSRs. We have a lot of work still to be done in, coming up with a solution for this, because if it was easy, we would already be doing this. But, it's something we are going to be throwing a lot of resources towards. And my boss has said that, she wants us to set up kind of a tiger team to work this issue, in the very near future. We're kind of consumed with moving towards phase 2, but as soon as that kind of settles down, we will put a lot more attention to trying to solve this particular problem as we move with the other phases, down the road. Again, this is just kind of some of our high-level thoughts about how this might work. It has not been, fully fleshed out yet, and is, I guess, subject to revision as we get closer to it. But we are, going to be working hard on this effort, and then we'll still be integrating with the DoD supply system, GFP data, and the DILMS transactions. So I think that's all I really want to say about that. The next slide, we have a lot of information on the DoD Procurement Toolbox about our GFP attachment process. The GFP module transition activities are kind of alluded to on there. We have some information about phase 2. We have a little bit about the other phases. We are trying to keep it updated in real time as we move down this process, so that you can get the information you need about, what is happening with the GFP module. We post, documents and examples and things like that as we get feedback. So we are trying to, utilize that as our, main method of communication, but we also are doing email and notifications through the toolbox to people who have signed up. Again, another plug then, so DoDProcurementToolbox.com, please, visit there if you haven't. That's where we post information about our training sessions. We'll be training on the phase 2 piece starting early June. We have done many sessions already on the phase 1 piece, the GFP attachment piece, and we'll continue to be doing more training on that piece. And then on the other phases as we go through there, mixed in with our other GFP attachment and GFP training. We have recorded sessions posted, and we'll have a recorded session for the GFP attachment process up, I think, within the next couple of weeks. The next slide, I kind of got ahead of myself there. That's the GFP training. There's a screenshot of the slides you can download from our toolbox. Slide 15. Again, this is the DPAP website that has policy information, and then the DoD Procurement Toolbox. Pam, is there anything you want to mention before I guess we open it up to questions?
No, I don't think so. I think you covered it.
Thanks. So I guess now we are ready for questions, Jessica.
Okay, great. We have quite a list for you, so we'll do our best. The first question that I have is, how should the discrepancies be handled in the system? So what are the contractor's responsibilities if they see a discrepancy?
So, I guess we're going to assume this is for phase 2. So the system is going to actually create an alert about that. Pam, do we know where that message might be sent or stored?
Right. So what will happen is, let's use the example of a contractor doing a unilateral receipt. So there's been no shipment document, surprise, surprise, from DoD. Yes, we're trying to increase the number of shipment documents, but for this scenario, let's say the shipment document isn't there, something shows up on the loading dock, the contractor is reporting the receipt of that GFP. They know what's on their attachment, presumably, but when they do their receipt, let's say it's NSN 123. So they say, hey, I have 10 of these. I'm going to receipt NSN 123. They'll put in NSN 123, and the system will come back and say, hey, on your GFP attachment, there isn't actually something that has NSN 123. So that alert will come up, and the contractor will say, yeah, but I've got this thing and I need to report that I've receipted for it. Perhaps there's a modification coming that hasn't quite happened yet, that kind of thing. We're not going to stop the reporting of that receipt, but we are going to alert to the contractor that he's receipting for something ostensibly for which he's not authorized. So it might trigger him to go, aha, on my GFP attachment, the government identified it by its manufacturer cage and part number, and therefore then they would want to go back and receipt that by the manufacturer cage and part number to align the receipt with the attachment, because At the end of the day, there will be a accountability that will compare the attachment to what's been received. And the mission here is to align the receipts with the attachment. So while we're not ever going to stop a receipt action from happening or a shipment action from happening, we are going to try to bounce it up against the authoritative source to alert. Those alerts will show up on the screen. They will show up as a response to the EDI, and they will also be aggregated and go to the contracting officer.
Thanks very much. The next question is, at what point can we expect contracting officers to start universally using the GFP attachment and automated GFP reporting for contracts?
Well, April 2nd was the expectation. Part of this is hard, right, for us to, it's been a requirement for them to use our format since at least 2012 and look at, how well that kind of works out. But what we are, hoping is that by these kind of continual improvements that we've done to get to this point, we are making it a lot more ridiculous for them to avoid our process, and that there's going to be more community, desire for them to follow our process, because it's going to really benefit their customer, the program office, logistics community, the contractor. So the expectation is that they have been following our process, and certainly the expectation is that come April 2nd that they switched over to the new process. But it is kind of a cheerleader role we have here about, hey, and then a reminder about requirements, and then also kind of the bigger picture, like why, they really should want to follow the rules. We do kind of lean on our DCMA friends to try to help us identify, areas where people are not following the property regulations, but in some cases, our DCMA friends are unaware of the requirement or more comfortable with not following our requirements too. So we're getting better. If you have scenarios, where it's not being done, if you want to kind of anonymously let us know that there's a problem, you could contact us through the contact us function so that we can try to point, our property leads in the right direction.
Great, thank you. Would you mind discussing the GFP receipt process for industry? So what are they to expect? Do they will assets need to be entered into the IUID registry by industry? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Carol, do you want me to take it?
Yes, please.
Okay. So today, in IRAPT, industry has the ability to report receipt of all GFP. Because the policy before 2012 was very focused on any GFP was IUID relevant, apparently that message got out really well, because people still seem to have that as a core tenet. But it is not. So GFP is GFP. Some GFP may have a UII. Some GFP may not have a UII. Today, only GFP that has a UII can be reported to the IUID registry. Anything that is serially managed without a UII and any non-serially managed GFP has to be reported through IRAPT today. So mid-July, when phase 2 goes into production, really that same baseline will exist. So the capabilities that exist in IRAPT today will be migrated to the GFP module. So it will essentially be the same thing. All GFP can be receipted reported through the GFP module. So if you are trying to do a single process initiative within your organization, it's probably a really good idea to focus on the either manual or, more likely for the large industry partners, the electronic interface to the GFP module. It is going to look a whole lot like the electronic interface to IRAP today, with a couple of changes, and those changes are documented and they are available on the DoD Procurement Toolbox under the GFP module transition page, because this is preparing for phase 2. So the question was, how does industry report in phase 2? The look and feel is going to be a kind of a common look and feel across the module, but the functionality will be very familiar to you if you've used IRAP, because we're essentially just taking that same functionality, rehosting it in the module, both for receipts and for shipments from industry, and then enhancing it with the foundation of both the GFP attachment and, especially for shipments, the cognizance of, if you've already receipted something and you're going to ship it back, then you would be able to select from those things that you've already receipted, essentially. So if you're using IRAP today, you should not see a huge process change. If you're not using IRAP today, you probably want to begin the transition to IRAP, because the direct interface to the IUID registry, over time, the forecast is that it will likely be decommissioned, because it circumvents the GFP module, and the mission of the GFP module is to be the ecosystem for GFP. So by reporting things direct to the registry, the GFP module does not have visibility into that, and that's a problem.
Thanks very much. The next question I have is, since the fillable PDF is no longer used, how should contractors request the transfer of CAP for the government to take delivery of CAP and convert it to GFP?
Carol, you want to take that one?
Carol. Sure. I'm not quite sure what was happening. Like the rules have been like the compliance with the rules have been all over the place. The expectation, we are moving in, the phase 3 piece is going to tee up CAP delivery when we pull in the PCAR's PLT functionality. If you're talking about something in the meantime, that's probably going to need to happen offline with the contractor. The PGI language says for certain items of CAP, either above the capitalization threshold or that are ST, STE, they need to let the contractor, officer know that they have those, so the contracting officer can have them delivered and added to the contract as GFP as soon as possible. But I guess until we have the system fix, that's going to be probably done offline. The stuff that was happening through PCARs wasn't actually working accurately. It wasn't ever being added via line item and gone through the inspection and acceptance and delivery process. It was just magically going from CAP to GFP, which actually was bypassing the property book, and part of the problem we've been trying to solve all these years with our heightened requirements around contractor required property. So insofar that seemed to be an easy solution, that wasn't actually solving the problems we needed to solve. And so, that's now been cut off, but it wasn't actually doing what we needed it to do. So it is kind of an offline, conversation now that has to happen. Some of the contracting officers I know have added seed roles for information about contractor required property so that they can make decisions about delivering it sooner or dispositioning it sooner. But that is kind of standard. We don't have DoD policy on that, and I don't believe there's an intention to establish right now more directive CAP policy on, having to do a CLIN or reporting for those items.
But just to pile on to that, Carol, the GFP attachment, whether it was the fillable PDF or the current format, has never been a vehicle for the contract or for the government to take delivery. That actually has to be on a CLIN, on the essentially the contract on which the CAP is created.
Yes, there was some grandfathering in of legacy CAP, where if we added it to the GFP attachment and we promised, very strongly that we would take that record and make an APSR record for it for the property books. But that is really, kind of a one-off situation. That's not how we're handling new CAP, as it currently stands.
Thanks very much. I'm going to throw out one more question here. I know we have a lot of unanswered questions still in the queue, but I do want to be mindful of everyone's time. So the next question I'm going to ask is, when PCARS goes to the GFP module, how are you going to dispose of CAP?
I guess I don't understand that question exactly, because we'd have to make a decision first as to what we want to do about the CAP, right? If it's something we would want delivered, or if we want it disposed of, or if we want to allow the contractor to buy it back. So, those decisions are still going to be embedded within the module. And then what ultimately happens to that, is still going to be similar to what happens to today. We're just going to have more reuse of that data and traceability and, about that process and that data in the system. Pam, is there anything you think to add on that?
I don't think so. I think you did a good job.
Great. Thank you both very much. And, I'm sorry to everyone on the phone that we couldn't get through everything. There were a ton of really great questions today. We really appreciate you all taking the time to put those questions in. And we really appreciate you, Carol and Pam, for taking the time to put this presentation together for our group. I know it was very helpful, and we had a lot of good interest today. So we really appreciate you doing that for us. Any closing thoughts before we depart?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, we do these webinars on a really frequent basis. So if you had a question or a concern or an issue that you didn't get to today, please, you could bring it to us next time we have a training session. We have kind of talked about the idea of doing a webinar Q&A where, hey, bring your questions to us. And so it sounds like maybe there would be a good queue of questions for that purpose. And so, Pam and I can maybe huddle on our schedule and see if there's something that we can add to the calendar for something, like that, just a open mic Q&A GFP module session.
I think the other option is if somebody has a hot burning question, that they can always submit it through the Contact Us feature on the DoD Procurement Toolbox.
Yes, of course.
Great. Well, thank you both very much, and I hope you have a great afternoon.
Thank you.